It was near the end of winter when Levi Carson tacked a note outside the general store in town. The paper, rough-edged and weighted down by a single nail, flapped in the wind like it was trying to fly away, a pale ghost against the weathered wood. The message was simple, stark as the leafless trees that lined the road out of town. Ranch cook needed. Room and board, fair pay. No nonsense. Levi didn't expect much. In a town where everyone's history was common property, his was a chapter most folks preferred to skip. They were either too proud or too scared to take work from a man like him, someone quiet, distant, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and didn't care to speak of it. He lived a few miles outside the edge of town, alone on a patch of land his father had carved out before the war, a place defined by wind and solitude. People whispered about him sometimes, their words swirling like dust devils in the general store or the saloon. They said he drank too much, that he kept to himself, with a fierceness that bordered on hostile. They said he had a temper, maybe, but no one ever really knew for sure. He hadn't always been that way. Once, he'd had a wife, Anna. Her laughter had been the true warmth in his house, a sound richer than any fire he could build in the stove. She died in the middle of a hard winter, 3 years back, a sickness that took her faster than any doctor could ride in time, stealing the light from his world and leaving behind a silence that was a physical weight. Since then, Levi had moved through the days like a man already halfway buried. He worked the land, his movements mechanical and efficient. He tended his horses, their soft knickers the only conversation he tolerated. He came into town only when he needed supplies or whiskey. His interactions brief and transactional. The ranch house was too big now, too quiet. Dust settled on the surfaces where laughter used to live, coating the memories he refused to touch. He didn't need a cook so much as he needed a reason to open his mouth and say something to another soul, a presence to break the suffocating stillness. So he waited. Days passed, bleeding into one another in a grayscale of falling snow and lengthening shadows. The snow kept falling, heavy and wet, blanketing the world in a pristine, unforgiving white. Nobody came. Then one night, just after sundown, a knock sounded on his door. It wasn't a hard, confident knock, more like a brush, timid and cold, almost lost in the howl of the wind. He'd been sitting near the stove, his boots off, a bottle of whiskey half empty on the table beside him. He almost didn't hear it, almost dismissed it as a branch scraping against the siding. But it came again, soft and strange, a desperate little tap against the thick wood. When he opened the door, the wind pushed in first, a blast of icy air that smelled of pine and coming frost. Then came a girl. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her cheeks were raw and red with a cold that went bone deep, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Her lips were chapped and bleeding, a thin line of red against the stark pallor of her skin. She had a thin coat wrapped tight around her, a garment wholly inadequate for the bite of the mountain winter. Tucked beneath it, sheltered against her body, was a baby. The child was crying, a faint, hungry wail, its tiny face pressed into the girl's chest. Snow clung to her skirt and was tangled in her dark hair, melting into cold droplets that ran down her neck. She didn't say a word at first, just looked up at him with eyes so wide and raw they seemed to hold all the fear in the world, like she'd been running from something with teeth. I saw the sign, she said, her voice cracking, each word a visible puff of mist in the cold air. The one about needing a cook. Levi stared at her for a long moment, his hand still gripping the edge of the door. His instincts, long dormant, stirred like old coals. Suspicion, hesitation. A girl, out here, this late, with a newborn. It didn't add up. The story didn't fit. The landscape. I ain't got much experience, she added quickly, her eyes lowering to the worn floorboards, as if his gaze was a physical weight. But I can work hard. I can learn. We need a place. Just for a little while. Asterisk. He looked past her, into the encroaching darkness. There was no horse, no wagon, just a single set of boot prints in the fresh snow, leading from the direction of the woods, as if she had materialized from the trees themselves. The baby let out another weak, plaintive cry, and the girl winced, tightening her arms around it. That was when Levi noticed her fingers, the tips blue and raw from the cold. A man could lose fingers to a night like this. A child wouldn't stand a chance. Asterisk, come in, he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. He stepped aside, holding the door open. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped across the threshold, as if the floor might vanish under her feet. The warmth of the room hit her, and she sagged a little. A visible release of tension, as though she'd been holding herself upright, with pure, desperate will. He shut the door behind her, the wind rattling the frame one last time before fading, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Asterisk. Levi moved to stoke the fire, adding another log to the stove. The flames licked at the fresh wood, casting dancing shadows across the room. She stood by the table, a ghost of a girl who looked like she hadn't slept in days, unsure where to go or what to do. He glanced back at her. You got a name? He asked. Asterisk. Claire. She whispered, her voice barely audible. Claire Monroe. Asterisk. The baby started to fuss again, its little body squirming against her. Claire looked down, her face pinched with a worry so deep it seemed to age her. Levi nodded toward the old rocking chair near the fire, the one Anna had loved. Sit there, warm him up. Asterisk. She obeyed as if she were following a direct order, moving with a dazed, almost automatic grace. As she settled into the chair and unwrapped the baby from the protective layers of her coat, Levi saw the tiny bundle's face for the first time. It was red and puffy, eyes squeezed shut, its mouth open in a soft, continuous wail. The baby looked hungry, cold, and tired. Claire's blouse was stained with milk or spit up, or maybe both. Her whole body trembled as she rocked the child back and forth, a rhythmic, desperate motion. Levi brought her a thick wool blanket from the chest by the wall, then poured some water into a kettle and set it on the stove. His movements were quiet, practiced, the familiar choreography of a man long accustomed to solitude. He didn't speak again for a while, letting the sound of the crackling fire and the creak of the rocking chair fill the space. Asterisk. When the baby finally quieted, suckling fitfully, at a cloth dipped in warm, sugary water, Claire leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. Her face was pale under the flush of cold, worn down to the bone. You running from someone? Levi asked, his tone not unkindly. Asterisk. Her eyes snapped open, a flicker of panic in their depths. She shook her head, but her voice betrayed her. No. He waited, his silence more probing than any question. My husband, she said finally, the words escaping in a rush. He died. She didn't say how or when. She didn't look like she wanted to explain. Asterisk. Levi Carson, he said, offering his own name as a kind of truce. They ate what little he had prepared for himself, beans, thick sliced bread, and strong, black tea. Claire ate like someone who hadn't seen a proper meal in days, her movements quick and almost furtive, as if she expected the food to be snatched away. Afterward, she thanked him in a quiet voice, her eyes fixed on the tabletop. He offered her the spare room, a space that hadn't been touched since Anna died. It still had her things in it. A faded quilt on the bed, a small wooden box on the dresser, a scent of lavender and dust. Claire didn't ask questions. She simply walked in, laid the baby down on the bed, and curled up next to him, still fully dressed. Within minutes, the steady rhythm of her breathing told him she was asleep. Asterisk. Levi stood in the doorway for a while, staring at the shape of her and the baby beneath the covers. The fire in the stove popped and hissed, but the rest of the house was silent. a different kind of silence than he was used to. It was a silence filled with presence, with the soft breathing of two other souls. He closed the door softly. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, the whiskey bottle forgotten, turning over the same thought in his mind like a worn stone. That girl is hiding something, and whatever it is, it's not far behind her. Morning came with a pale, gray light and the scent of smoke and coffee. Levi had been up for hours, moving through his chores with his usual quiet rhythm, feeding the horses, hauling water, breaking the thin layer of ice in the troughs. He didn't check on the spare room right away, but he listened for movement. For a long while, there was nothing. Just the hush of the wind and the slow creak of wood warming in the fire. When Claire finally emerged, she looked even smaller in the morning light. Her eyes were hollow, ringed with shadows, but she had washed her face and tied back her hair. The baby, bundled tight against her chest again, seemed quieter now, though his breathing was still a little raspy. Levi handed her a tin mug of coffee. Without a word, she took it with both hands, the warmth of the cup making her flinch, as if it were a sensation she had forgotten. You sleep any? He asked. A little, she said. They sat at the table in silence, the only sound, the occasional hiss from the stove. Levi didn't know what to say to her, didn't know how to ask the questions that crowded his mind without sounding like he was prying, like he was another man demanding something from her, but something about the way she held herself, like someone used to being cornered, made him careful. Claire broke the silence first. I'll work for what we eat. I wasn't lying about that. I didn't know where else to go. You cook? He asked. She hesitated, then gave a soft, crooked smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Not well, but I can learn. My mama used to say I burned water. It was the first thing she'd said with any light in it, a flicker of a person who existed, before the fear. Levi found himself watching her face longer than he meant to. He could see them more clearly now in the daylight, the faint yellowing bruises at the edge of her jaw, the thin scratches along her hands and wrists. She noticed him looking and unconsciously adjusted her sleeves to cover them. I don't need a servant, he said, his voice gruff. Just someone to keep the house running. You do that? You and the baby can stay. Claire gave a quick, grateful nod, her eyes lowered again. That quiet fear hadn't left her. She looked like someone who hadn't let herself believe she was safe yet, who couldn't be sure the ground beneath her feet was solid. By the third day, the snow let up, and Claire started moving around the house as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. She cleaned, her movements tentative at first, then more confident. She did laundry by hand in a large basin, the scent of soap and wet wool filling the air. She swept the dust from corners Levi hadn't touched in years. The baby, whom she finally told him was named Eli, cried often, but never for long. Claire was gentle with him, patient. Her love for that child, the one thing about her that was clear and unwavering. Everything else about her was a locked door. It was on the 5th day that trouble came to the edge of the ranch. Levi spotted the riders around noon, 2 men on horseback moving slow down the trail that led from town. They didn't turn in, just pass by, but something about the way they scanned the land, their eyes lingering on his house, stuck with him. One of them had a rifle slung low, too casual for comfort. The other wore a black duster, and had the kind of posture that meant he'd been a lawman once, or wanted people to think he had. They didn't stop, but they looked. Their presence was a question hanging in the cold air. That night, after the baby was asleep, Levi asked her straight, "You said your husband died?" Claire sat at the hearth, sewing a tear in one of her sleeves, her needle moving with small, precise stitches. She didn't answer right away. "He did," she said, her voice low and steady, but not the way folks expect. Levi waited, his patience a vast, empty landscape. Asterisk, he wasn't a good man. She continued, her eyes fixed on the fire, as if the story were written in the flames. He drank, hurt people when he got mad. Me most of all. He thought the baby. He thought Eli wasn't his. Said I'd shamed him. One night, he came home, and I thought he was going to kill us both. Her hands stilled in her lap, the needle and thread forgotten. Her eyes didn't move from the fire. So I ran. He came after me, but I didn't stop. He caught up to me near a river crossing, tried to pull the baby from my arms. I fought back. Her voice was flat now, detached, as if she were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. He slipped, hit his head on a rock. I didn't check if he was breathing. I just ran. Asterisk Levi didn't speak for a long time. His hands were folded in his lap, his fingers tight. Those men today, he said finally. They looked like bounty trackers. Asterisk, Claire nodded slowly, a single, tired movement. He had friends. Rough ones. Some in town, some who ride up from over the border. They won't let it go easy. Asterisk, you think they'll come here? Asterisk, I don't know, she whispered, her voice fragile again, but I don't have anywhere else. Asterisk, the silence that followed was heavy and long. Outside, the wind was rising again, rattling the shutters like skeletal fingers seeking a way in. Asterisk, a few days later, a wagon rolled into the yard, bringing an old friend Levi hadn't seen in years. May Hollander, a widow from town who once worked with Levi's wife at the Mercantile. She came bearing a basket of food and a satchel full of questions, mostly about the girl. Asterisk, I heard there was a young woman staying up here with a babe, May said as she poured herself a mug of coffee, making herself at home. That's what Earl at the feed store said. Asterisk, Levi didn't confirm or deny anything. May was a sharp-tongued woman, but she'd always been kind to Anna, and Levi figured she'd do no harm. Claire stayed back, watching from the edge of the room, her eyes cautious and wary. Asterisk, she's been quiet, Levi said, offering a carefully measured truth. Works hard, doesn't ask for much. Asterisk, May raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. She's hiding something, you know. Asterisk, I know. Asterisk, May gave him a long, searching look, then her expression softened. Well, if she's here, she's yours to protect now. People talk. That baby's going to draw attention. Asterisk, after May left, Claire came to the table, clutching her hands together. You trust her? She asked. Asterisk, I trust that she keeps things to herself when it matters. Asterisk, Claire nodded slowly. I don't want to bring trouble here, but I don't think I can stop it from coming. Asterisk, Levi looked at her then, really looked at her. Not as a scared girl, not as a burden, but as someone strong enough to run for her child, to survive alone through cold and fear and hunger. She wasn't helpless, just exhausted. I've faced worse than a couple of hired guns, he said, his voice a low rumble. Let them come. Asterisk, she looked away, blinking fast, the gesture a silent admission of a gratitude she couldn't yet speak. Still, that night, he moved a rifle from the barn and leaned it behind the front door, just in case. Asterisk, the days stretched on, quieter than Levi expected. The snow melted into muddy puddles along the path to the barn, and the early, stubborn edge of spring began to show itself in the form of tenacious weeds and pale blue skies. Claire found a rhythm in the house. She washed clothes, mended seams, and cooked simple meals that slowly improved as she experimented with what little they had. She was still nervous in the mornings, especially when Levi came in from the fields, as if she wasn't sure if he'd be angry, or cold, or simply silent. But every time, he just nodded at her, sometimes with a small grunt of thanks, if the coffee was hot, or the food was warm. He never yelled. He never raised a hand. It confused her at first, this radical neutrality. The idea that someone could just exist nearby and not hurt her was a foreign concept. She didn't fully trust it, not yet, but something in her started to loosen. Her shoulders didn't sit so tight by her ears. By the end of the second week, the dark circles under her eyes had faded a little. The baby. Eli began to sleep more and cry less. He responded to Levi's deep voice when he came near, sometimes staring at the large, quiet man with a wide-eyed wonder that only infants possessed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, and the shadows stretched long and thin across the floorboards, Claire sat by the window, rocking Eli. Levi was at the stove, spooning stew into 2 bowls. His movements were rough, but thoughtful. He had started eating with her every night. At first, it was awkward, the silent meals punctuated only by the scrape of spoons and the occasional cough. But now, they talked a little. Simple things. The weather, the animals, the stubborn horse that refused to be shoed. That night. Claire said something that caught him off guard. She looked up from the baby and said, "You remind me of my uncle." He didn't talk much either, but when he did, he always meant what he said. Levi looked at her, a long contemplative gaze, before replying, "I don't have much use for words. Most people don't listen anyway." "I listen," she said, and it sounded like a promise. In small, incremental ways, the house started to change. Claire cleaned the glass on the old framed pictures that had gathered dust for years, revealing faded images of a younger Levi and a smiling Anna. She aired out the room that used to be Anna's, opening the windows to let the light and the scent of pine back in. She even folded Levi's laundry once, carefully stacking his shirts with neat corners and a warm patience. He didn't say anything about it, but the next day, he sharpened the kitchen knives for her without being asked. One afternoon, Claire found the old garden plot behind the house. It had been swallowed by weeds, the wooden fencing half rotted, but when she dug her hands into the dark, rich soil, she smiled for the first time in days, a genuine, unburdened smile. That evening, after supper, she asked Levi if it would be all right to plant something. Once the frost fully cleared, he shrugged, a gesture that was less indifference and more a quiet permission. "You think it'll grow?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes bright with a sudden, fierce hope. "I think it wants to." So he brought her seeds from town a few days later. Beans, carrots, squash, and even a small packet of wildflowers. She held them in her palm, like they were made of gold. When she thanked him, her voice trembled. Claire began humming sometimes when she worked, soft, unrecognizable tunes that were gentle and meandering. It made the house feel different, less hollow. One night, Levi heard her singing to the baby, just above a whisper, a lullaby from a life he knew nothing about. He stood outside the room for a moment, not wanting to interrupt, the sound tightening something in his chest he hadn't felt in years, a feeling that was dangerously close to tenderness. There were moments when their eyes met and held for a second longer than necessary, when she handed him a cup or brushed past him to fetch something from the pantry. Neither of them said anything, but there was a quiet weight to those moments, like something fragile and steady and real was being built between them. But there were still shadows. Some nights, Claire woke up gasping. She never screamed, just sat bolt upright in bed, clutching Eli to her chest, her breath coming fast and ragged, like she was drowning in the dark. Levi heard her through the thin wall, but he never went in, sensing it was a private battle. In the morning, she would act as if nothing had happened, her face a pale, composed mask. He didn't press her. Then one afternoon, while Claire was hanging sheets out to dry, a rider appeared. He wasn't one of the 2 Levi had seen before. This man was younger, but his face was mean and watchful. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and his coat was dusted with the grit of long travel. Claire spotted him first. She froze, one hand gripping the wet sheet, the other cradling the baby instinctively against her chest. Levi came out of the barn slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw the man's eyes flick toward Claire, then settle back on him. Asterisk, looking for something? Levi asked, his voice even. Asterisk, just passing through, the man replied. His voice was light, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. Heard there was a woman out this way, matching a certain description, riding with a baby. Folks in town said she might have come this way. Asterisk, Levi's jaw tightened. I ain't seen anyone like that. Asterisk. The man looked at him for a long, skeptical moment. Then his lips curled into a smirk. All right then. If you do, let her know she's being missed. He turned his horse and rode off, slow, like he had all the time in the world. Asterisk, Levi didn't look at Claire until the rider was a small dot on the horizon. You know him? He asked. Asterisk, she nodded, her face as pale as the sheets hanging on the line behind her. He worked with my husband, did things for him, watched me. I didn't think he'd track me this far. Asterisk, Levi said nothing, but that night, he moved the rifle from behind the door into his own bedroom and loaded every round he had. Asterisk, despite the rising fear, life pressed on. They couldn't live in a state of constant panic. Claire didn't want Eli growing up in a world of silence and dread, so she kept cooking, kept tending the tiny rows of sprouts that were now pushing through the soil in the garden bed, kept rocking her son each evening by the window. Levi started leaving her notes, small lists of chores, sure, but sometimes little things scribbled on scrap paper. Use the last jar of peaches, or soup was good. It became their language, a series of quiet, simple exchanges that built something solid between them. Asterisk, one morning, Claire brought him a piece of pie she'd managed to make from flour and some canned apples May had dropped off the week before. She handed it to him without a word, watching his face as he took the first bite. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully, then nodded. Damn near perfect. Asterisk, Claire laughed, a sound so open and surprised that it startled them both. I was sure I'd burned it. Asterisk, you're improving. A pause then, with a small, almost imperceptible smile, he added, so are you. Asterisk, they sat on the porch after supper more often now, wrapped in old blankets, watching the stars come out in the vast, dark sky. Claire would talk a little more on those nights, about her mother, her childhood in Kansas, her simple dreams of having a little place with chickens and a porch of her own. Levi never spoke of Anna, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't yet know how to talk about a love that had died without turning the air heavy with ghosts. Asterisk, but one night, he did say something. She used to sit out here, too, my wife, same time of day. Asterisk, Claire looked over at him, her silhouette soft in the starlight. Do you think she'd hate that I'm here? Asterisk, he shook his head, the movement slow and certain. No, I think she'd like you. You don't scare easy. Asterisk, I scare all the time, she said, her voice a quiet confession. I just don't run anymore. Asterisk, it was the closest either of them had come to saying what was growing between them. Not love. Not yet, but something like shelter, trust, a hand reaching through the dark, hoping someone would take it, and for a while, they did. The days grew warmer. Eli started smiling more, his little hands reaching up when Claire leaned in to kiss his cheek. Levi carved him a small wooden rattle, rough and unpainted, but made with a patient care that spoke volumes. Claire held it to her chest when she thought Levi wasn't looking. A tangible piece of kindness in a world that had offered her so little of it. Asterisk, they weren't safe, not really. The memory of that rider lingered, and the threat of more men showing up hung just behind every sunset. But in the quiet spaces and the small acts, the mended shirts, the shared meals, the sound of Eli's soft laughter, they found pieces of peace. It wasn't the life either of them had expected, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, out in the West, That was more than most people ever got. Asterisk spring warmed the land, but Claire's heart stayed cold in places no sun could reach. The days were kind, often gentle. Buds appeared on the trees. Eli grew stronger and more curious, and Levi was a quiet but constant presence nearby. Still, the fear hadn't gone. It lived beneath her skin, a dormant beast, waiting. She smiled when she had to, hummed lullabies to Eli, and planted seeds with steady hands. But at night, the past pressed in. She could hear her husband's voice. Sometimes, even in her dreams, that low, mean tone, full of suspicion and fury. It stole her breath in the dark. Some mornings she woke with her fists clenched, her throat sore as if she'd been shouting into a silence too wide to fill. Asterisk, Levi noticed. He didn't say anything at first, but the way he looked at her changed. The stares were longer, filled with a quiet concern that furrowed his brow. He'd taken to sitting outside her door some nights after she'd gone to bed, sharpening his knife or carving a piece of wood, the scrape of the blade a soft, protective sound in the sleeping house. When she asked him why, he just said it helped him sleep. But she knew the truth. He was watching the dark for her. Asterisk one morning, Levi brought her a package from town, an old shawl wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. It wasn't fancy, a simple thing of dark blue wool, but it was soft and warm and smelled faintly of cedar. Claire opened it with trembling hands. It had been so long since anyone had given her something without expecting anything in return. Asterisk 4. The cold mornings, he muttered, looking away towards the barn. You're always out before the sun. Asterisk she swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. Thank you. Asterisk he just nodded. Didn't cost much, but the gift did something strange. It cracked something deep inside her. That night, after Eli was asleep, she sat by the fire and finally told Levi what her husband had truly done. Asterisk he wasn't just angry, she began, her voice a low murmur. He was cruel. He liked to watch me flinch, like making me feel small made him feel big. When I got pregnant, I thought maybe it would soften him, that he'd change. But he just got worse. Her voice broke, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if to hold the pieces together. I stayed because I was scared. I thought maybe I deserved it, that I'd done something to cause it. Asterisk Levi sat still, his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the fire. You didn't, he said. The two words, a solid weight, in the quiet room. Asterisk, I didn't leave until the night he put a gun to my head. He said he'd shoot Eli first, make me watch. That's when I knew I had to run. Her body shook with the memory, and tears she didn't know she had left to cry slipped down her face, as quietly as the wind through the trees. Levi reached out and placed his large, calloused hand gently over hers, where it rested on her knee. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. His touch was an anchor. Asterisk, but letting it out didn't bring peace. It brought new fears. With the truth now spoken, Claire felt exposed. The memory of her husband, of how he'd found her once before, when she'd tried to leave, haunted her all over again. That next week, she kept checking the windows, jumping whenever the door creaked. Even Eli seemed more fussy, as if he could feel the unrest radiating from her. Levi did what he could. He patched the fencing tighter, oiled the hinges on the doors so no one could sneak in quiet. He even started sleeping in the big chair by the front window, but he couldn't reach the terror that was rooted deep in her mind. Asterisk, and then the storm came. It rolled in fast one night, the sky turning a bruised purple-black. Dark clouds gathered, heavy with rain that fell in sheets, and the wind howled like a pack of wolves. The roof leaked in 2 places, and Levi was up late with buckets. Claire held Eli close, rocking him in the dark, as thunder cracked overhead, shaking the very foundations of the house. A sudden violent slam just a barn door, blown loose by the wind, made her scream. Asterisk Levi rushed in to find her crouched in the corner of the room. shaking, whispering, please don't, over and over like a prayer. He dropped to the floor beside her, his knees hitting the rough wood. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Claire, it's me, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Just me. She blinked, her eyes wide and unfocused. Then she buried her face in his chest, sobbing like a flood had finally broken inside her. Levi held her for a long time, not speaking, just anchoring her with his solid warmth. When the crying slowed to ragged breaths, she whispered, I thought I was done being afraid. You've got every right to be, he said softly into her hair. I feel like I'm losing my mind. You're not. But even as he said it, Levi knew she was reaching a breaking point. He went to May Hollander the next day, his face grim. He asked if she could come stay for a few nights. May didn't ask questions, just showed up with a satchel and a determined look on her face. She brought calming tea, strong opinions, and a kind of hard-earned tenderness that didn't flinch it. The face of brokenness. She sat with Claire, letting her talk or not talk. She brushed Claire's hair one evening when she couldn't stop trembling, her touch firm and soothing. She held the baby when Claire couldn't stop crying long enough to feed him. You've been surviving for too long, child, May said one afternoon, her voice surprisingly gentle. That's not the same as living. Claire listened but didn't reply. Meanwhile, Levi kept busy, fixing things, tools, hinges, the leaky roof, anything to keep his hands occupied. He couldn't stand seeing her so hollowed out. He felt helpless, and he hated that feeling more than anything. One night, after May had gone to bed, and Eli was finally quiet, Levi stood out on the porch, the air cool and clean after the storm. Claire joined him. She was pale, tired, but she was standing. Why are you still helping me? She asked, her voice small against the vastness of the night. You don't owe me anything. He looked at her for a long moment, the moonlight catching the silver in his hair. Don't need to owe someone to care what happens to them. I'm not easy to be around. I bring trouble. He gave a soft laugh, a sound that was almost bitter. So did my wife. She was stubborn, loud when she was angry, but she had a good heart. Claire stared out at the dark shapes of the distant hills. I'm not sure mine works right anymore. Levi turned toward her. It's working. You're still here. She bit her lip. You're not afraid I'll fall apart? I'm afraid you'll keep pretending you're fine when you're not. That silenced her, but it also settled something deep inside. The next morning, Claire tried again. She got up early, made breakfast, and fed Eli without flinching at every creak in the house. She even smiled once, a small but real curve of her lips. She asked Levi to teach her how to fix the fence, said she wanted to be useful beyond the kitchen. So they worked side by side that day, their hands growing raw from splinters, dirt smudging their faces. Claire asked him questions about cattle, fencing, weather patterns, anything to keep her mind off the shadows. Levi answered patiently, occasionally teasing her when she fumbled with the tools. By late afternoon, she had dirt on her face, a sunburned nose, and the kind of tired that felt honest and earned. But peace never lasted long. 2 days later, the rider came back. This time, he didn't stop at the trail. He rode right into the yard. Claire saw him from the kitchen window and froze, a plate slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. Levi stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held loosely across his arm, calm but ready. Afternoon, the rider said. Same man, same hat, but this time he looked less friendly. You're still out here alone? He asked, his eyes scanning the house. Not alone, Levi said. Flatly. The man nodded, a smug look on his face. Right? Heard there's a woman been staying with you? Her folks in Kansas are awful worried. offering a reward to see her return safe. Claire stepped out then, her shoulders straight. Eli held tight in her arms. Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying, clearly in the still air. You tell them I'm not going back. My name's Claire Devlin, my husband is dead, and I'm not anyone's property. The man looked her up and down, a dismissive sneer on his face. That's so. Well, you can tell it to the judge when someone comes to fetch you. She didn't do anything wrong, Levi said, stepping down off the porch, placing himself between the man and Claire. You want to drag a woman and her baby through the mud over a drunk's death. You go ahead and try, but I promise you, it won't be easy. There was a long, tense pause. The man's hand hovered near the gun on his belt, but he didn't draw. He spat in the dirt, a gesture of contempt. Then he turned his horse. I'll be back, he said, the threat hanging in the air. Levi watched him ride off. Then he turned to Claire. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady, a fire lit in their depths. I'm tired of running, she said. Then we'll stand, he replied. But inside, Claire's heart was twisting. She wasn't afraid of the rider anymore. She was afraid of what came after. Afraid of what would happen if Levi got hurt for helping her. Afraid of what Eli would remember if this life she was trying so desperately to build was shattered. That night, she sat awake while the house slept, rocking her son and whispering every promise she could think of into his soft hair. She would fight for this life, even if it meant facing the past with nothing but a trembling heart and the memory of someone who once said, "You don't need to owe someone to care." She believed him now. She just hoped it wouldn't cost them both more than they had left to give.